Nobody really knew what sort of the supply signals looked like. Nobody knew what the demand signals would look like. And nobody really had a clue what the employee signals would look like. So, that sort of lends itself to this sort of wonderful cloud property called elasticity.
I think we're all chasing, in some sense, a market which is rapidly, exponentially grown in the last 6 months.
I think we're going to see a lot more architecture decisions and software engineering decisions where we're architecting our building for the expectation of change. So we don't have to be reactive, right? We can have a more fluid solution.
The cloud is great. It solves a lot of real-world problems, but it's not just one cloud anymore. Public clouds, private clouds, edge clouds. The average business uses 5 different cloud providers. It's become chaotic and complex, with unpredictable costs, inconsistent security, multiple management tools, and different formats for workloads that span cloud platforms and providers. But it doesn't have to be that way. The Dell Technologies Cloud, powered by VMware, can be the one constant across your clouds. It brings consistent infrastructure and operations to your multi-cloud environment, so you can choose the right cloud for each application. A public cloud that lets you easily tap into services, a private cloud that's fully under your control, or the edge with cloud as a service. With a true hybrid cloud experience, your business becomes more agile with simple workload migration and easy onboarding for new assets. Your teams get to market faster. With simplified operations and automated processes, you reduce risk and strengthen your security profile. And with Dell Technologies Cloud, you have flexible consumption options, reducing your total cost of ownership. Like it or not, the business world often requires many clouds. Now, that's easier than ever, with consistent infrastructure, operations, and services across all your clouds. You get the cloud without the chaos. The Dell Technologies Cloud.
Matt Robinson is the CTO of Rise Systems. He has previously held leadership roles at Google, NetApp, and Silicon Graphics. Matt's charter at Rise Systems is to help build a new cloud services organization, leveraging hybrid cloud solutions. Matt received his bachelor's degree in computer science from University of California, Riverside. Please join me welcoming Matt. Matt, the floor is yours. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks, Manoj. Welcome again to everyone, and thank you for joining us for this conversation with 5 outstanding leaders in our industry. There's a few themes to discuss today, but before we dig in, I'd like to encourage our audience to ask questions for our panelists on the topics today. We expect to be able to get to 1 to 2 audience questions towards the end of the session, so please use the app to submit any questions you may have. Without further ado, and for the sake of having a virtual session today and connecting names and voices to the faces with our panelists, I'd like the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and their roles to the audience. Let's start.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
I'm Santi Iyer, and I run Cisco's Data and Analytics office. Glad to be here and looking forward to learning from the rest of the panel here.
Great. Anthony.
Yes, Anthony Lai. I lead the public cloud services team at NetApp. Have been really in clouds before they were called clouds, building SaaS applications at a number of very successful businesses, CRM, ERP, human capital management. And at NetApp, my job really is to provide a set of infrastructure services as APIs on top of Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and Amazon's web services.
Great. Next, we have Vikas.
Hi, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yep. Loud and clear.
Well, thank you for having me here. I appreciate it. And hopefully everyone is staying safe and healthy. I am head of product management for the business application platform at Google Cloud. And prior to Google, I've been working in the space of cloud for many years, specifically in platform as a service capabilities. So happy to be part of the panelists and actually to learn from everyone on this panel.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Raghu.
Yeah, hey folks, this is Raghu here. I'm with Microsoft Azure. Super happy to be here and of course, listen to the conversations, talk through it. I run cloud infrastructure planning, capacity and all the customer service delivery here at Microsoft. And it's exciting times. So looking forward to the conversation here.
Great. And last but not least, Chris.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'm Chris Wolf. I run the Advanced Technology Group in VMware's corporate office at the CTO. Our focus is sub-3-year off-roadmap innovation. So we currently have roughly 15 different innovation projects that are incubating that'll see product in the next 6 to 12 months.
Awesome. Hopefully we can get to some of those in the discussion. Let's start as a group with a topic that's impacting all of us, hearing safe and healthy, for example, and that's the pandemic and how it relates to changing our consumption patterns for cloud, not just in terms of our day-to-day engagement with technology, but how companies are adapting to new consumption models for remote workers, distance learning, and supply chain management. Shanti.
I've always chosen to surround myself by great people who are very forward-thinking when it comes to gender issues and diversity. I think diversity is a key and central element of any environment, and I've never been in an environment where diversity doesn't lead to a better place. From a science perspective, we know that if you have greater diversity of microbes, for example, in your gut, that you're more likely to be healthy. And that's finding of diversity of microbes in your gut. If you think about the diversity of people in a working environment, it leads to a healthier environment and more innovation.
Management. Shanti, if I can start with you, I believe you work with a number of healthcare organizations today, many who have had to adjust to a new form of doctor, patient, and facility engagement. How have you seen their adjustment to using cloud technologies and new platforms as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. So, one of the first things we saw, and I'm also an exec sponsor for a few hospitals across the country, one of the first few things we saw was a need to do protection and kind of saving of the PPE equipment. So to do that, in fact, Stanford was the first one that called us and said, hey, we would like to have a little bit more of the DX80 units, which are our video conferencing units. And the rationale for that was, can we help prevent a lot of the doctors and the nurses going into the rooms every time coming out? And what part of the conversation we can have and detect through video? And so, in fact, one of the first things we did was across the Cisco offices, there were a lot of DX80s sitting around, and many of us were working from home, so there were thousands of them available. So in fact, we ran a war room, a situation room, and then across hospitals, we took a rain check of who needed what, and then deployed a lot of these video conferencing units. In a lot of ways, this helped, the hospital kind of provide the care that they needed to provide, but it also helped us think through how we should do video conferencing a little bit more differently and uniquely and kind of adapt. And we're seeing that now in the education department as well. So yeah, that's how we responded right away, right after the COVID shutdown and shelter in place.
Yeah, I know it's changing a lot of the ways we look at how we use technology today, and even just thinking to those people not in offices and needing, remote access to desktops. Anthony, maybe pivoting over to you. I know cloud-based desktop computing has become pretty important now. I've personally spoken to a number of enterprise companies during this lockdown period who needed remote desktop access for customer support, where they're dealing with PHI or PCI type data. How do you see customers using new cloud consumption models for virtual desktops and engaging in a desktop experience very different than maybe what they're used to in the office?
Yeah, no, I think to follow on from Shanti's comments, I think from our perspective, all of the sort of the business signals, the telemetry that we use to run our businesses, excuse me, kind of went haywire, right? Nobody really knew what sort of the supply signals looked like. Nobody knew what the demand signals would look like. And nobody really had a clue what the employee signals would look like. So, that sort of lends itself to this sort of wonderful cloud property called elasticity. And, the back ends of these public clouds have, so much sort of potential to sort of rise and fall based on these sort of unknown parameters that I think many institutions saw sort of cloud as the sort of the sole platform that could handle the variability and the uncertainty. And of course, desktops, much like sort of applications, have sort of significant sort of challenges in terms of scaling up and scaling down. And so for us, I think we saw a massive surge in the deployment of virtual desktop infrastructures, that everybody sort of recognized that a significant portion of the workforce didn't have laptops or maybe had their own devices. And so people chose the cloud as the sort of the dominant back end, and then looked at technologies to deploy remote desktop services. And, companies like Microsoft, I know are on the call, but, partner with us. And Microsoft is seeing huge growth with NetApp around Microsoft's Windows Virtual Desktop, which has really, I think, come in and provided a significant opportunity for Microsoft customers to take advantage of it. And it's the same thing, we see on Google. We do a lot of business with Google on virtual desktop infrastructure. So it's become, it was a hot topic before COVID. It's a massive, I think, business transformation now with COVID.
Absolutely, and just thinking through even the collaboration experiences that Raghu and Vikas, you can both probably speak to, and maybe in talking to the hyperscalers and starting with Raghu and then moving over to Vikas, how do you see the cloud patterns changing with your customers, given migrations into public cloud for certain workloads, and maybe how has the technology changed as a result of the pandemic? Raghu, we'll start with you and then pivot over to Vikas.
Yeah, sure. Anthony brought up a great point there, right? When you think about the scenario that we're all living and the partnership that Microsoft, for example, has with NetApp and so on. Cloud, if you really think about it, take a step back. It's truly become the growth equalizer, if you will, right? Which is democratizing growth. Doesn't matter whether you're a startup, whether you're an enterprise, doesn't matter. It's truly doing that, right? But what this unfortunate COVID scenario has done is it's truly running an experimentation, a massive one at scale, right? And we're all living through it. And as Anthony said, we're learning through it. None of us know exactly what's going to happen, but we're working through it, right? And I think what this is driving is a tremendous, not just adoption in the traditional enterprises, but it's adoption in what I would consider as mainstream. I've got a son in high school, and schools are completely on board when you think about it, right? Whether it's collaboration tools, whether it's full digital first on cloud, it's just become a complete transformation, if you will, pull through of demand, which we would have expected the next 2-3 years, really has happened a hockey stick in the last 6 months, right? And so that is the primary driver of the consumption when you think about it, and every step of the way. I think we're all chasing, in some sense, a market which is rapidly, exponentially grown in the last 6 months. And I think what we have to do is, Shanti brought up the point on hospitals. We take a step back and think about all first responders, whether it's hospitals or whether it's any kind of a day-to-day emergency need. You've got mission critical police departments and all the government sectors, which are completely now on the cloud. They wouldn't even expected it, right? And so that is the wave. It's not the wave of the future, it's the wave of today as we think about it. And that's what we're kind of going through every piece of our solutions as we think about it, infrastructure, platform, or SaaS.
Vikas, any thoughts?
Sure. I think the panelists have already talked at length about it, but I just want to add a few things over here. I agree with the points made by Anthony and Raghu, and I just want to add to that, saying that this situation has actually proven to be a force multiplier and value driver for businesses to actually embrace digital. I think that's the big thing, and especially with the current context, of course, the collaboration from home. What's really interesting is the paradigm shift of the consumer behavior, consumer expectation, which many companies were not prepared for. And of course, the new situations which got created, right? Especially with, trying to monitor the assets in hospitals, the PPEs, on the other side, the federal and state governments are trying to look at how we can roll out unemployment benefits suddenly, which they were not prepared for. They had to start looking at solutions for that. So there has been a key driver for solving these problems, and cloud has become a choice for that. So if you look at each of the spaces around, whether it's e-commerce for retail, digital banking for finance, or for media and gaming, there is a strong use of cloud over there. And just look at this, we are actually running TCon 2020, all of us sitting in our offices and living rooms at home in a virtual world. It's so smooth because of the capabilities we had available for scale to support this kind of collaboration. And I think collaboration has become really important when it comes to things like telemedicine. Learning is not restricted anymore. You can learn anywhere. I think we learned this at school, where learning is not limited by physical space, and that's truly something which has been seen over here as a part of this situation. So just to give you some examples, like with G Suite, with Google Meet, we've seen over in Q2 we've peaked at over more than 600 million Meet participants in a single week, right? And this is the big change which has happened. In terms of retail, consumers, as the retail industry pivoted, their stores were closed for some time. They basically converted them to fulfillment centers. The retail workers who were actually in stores helping people make decisions to buy became fulfillment workers, helping curbside delivery. So the fundamental shifts which happened are, I think, going to stay for a while, and the future of work, will not be the same as we have experienced in the past.
And in thinking to that future and what innovation means, Chris, I know VMware has continued to innovate during this period. Are there trends that you're looking at or you're seeing that may be being introduced at this time in a more rapid sense because of the pandemic, but have sustainability, or maybe you see continuing once this pandemic starts to recede?
Yeah, I think there's a lot happening here. Just to piggyback on some of Anthony and Vikas's points. At VMware, we have 30,000 employees that learn to use our Workspace ONE platform from the first day they start at the company. So when we had to have this massive shift to work from home, it was really just using the same SaaS portal you've used to access all of your apps that you would use in the office. So that really wasn't that much of a challenge for the company. But what was if you're a laptop-based employee, using your laptop 24/7 at home is not a really good experience. So actually getting hardware to home users, getting their home offices staffed up, right? That was a challenge. I think about my children, they had been using Google Classroom all along. So for them to pivot to online learning in the state of New Jersey, it really wasn't as disruptive as it could be in other places where that wasn't already there. And the point I'm trying to make is, I think we're going to see a lot more architecture decisions and software engineering decisions where we're architecting our building for the expectation of change. So we don't have to be reactive, right? We can have a more fluid solution. And that gets into other areas like Vikas mentioned, telemedicine. And when you think about this, areas that we've been working on for the last couple of years has been around technologies such as 5G network slicing. So this is capabilities where when you start to think about emerging areas like virtualized radio access networks, we're able to start to oversubscribe radio access networks. We're able to provide an end-to-end quality of service from a mobile endpoint all the way to a server application running in a cloud or data center. And that's really important in use cases like telemedicine. When you start to think about that communication between a patient and a doctor, it has to stand up, right? It can't fall down. It needs to be a good, meaningful quality. And that's a more prioritized communication session than the Netflix that my daughter is probably watching right now, right? So these are important innovations that need to move us forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even in the logistics side of the house, from a global shipping standpoint, in terms of working with our customers, we see even just getting an individual to a location, given some of the geopolitical situations and the ability to have a person, let's say, leave the U.S. to go do maintenance inside of a data center, is a real challenge. I'd like to pivot our conversation to a second topic. Somewhat aligns with what you were talking about, Chris, around cloud democratization and disaggregation in these distributed models. So we're seeing a lot of growth in companies adjusting their spending and consumption patterns for IaaS and PaaS towards cloud-like use cases. And through that process and those patterns, it's driving to a more diversified and robust portfolio of technology that companies are having to take on. And this is leading to all kinds of cloud consumption patterns around software choice, data locality, as well as tremendous operationalization challenges through that because of all these additional choices and where people place workloads and having multiple cloud platforms to utilize. Shanti, if you don't mind, I'd like to pivot back to you again. I know Cisco's been a strong player in the cloud market for many years, not just providing core technology for hybrid cloud and distributed cloud models, but also having your own SaaS platform like WebEx. How would you describe Cisco's own journey with using cloud today, and what difference has it made for your own company's agility?
Yeah, first of all, a big shout out to Raghu. Raghu, a good hi to after very many years. He used to work at Cisco, and it's fantastic to see him on video again.
Great to see you too, Shanti. Same here.
So, for us, it has been a journey that has gone through various ups and downs, to be frank, right? Like our early cloud journey was, towards how do we make some of our networking products show up in cloud and how do we actually adapt that technology. Then we went through a series of acquisitions, and acquisitions, one forced us to think about cloud in a particular way, and also pivoted us to think really consumer and customer first. That changed how we looked at cloud and enabling cloud not only for our internal processing, but also cloud workloads for our customers. So we do this in almost like 4 ways. Yeah. The first one is we want to make sure that the customers are reimagining their applications and build and deploying them quickly and really having analytics embedded, etc., about how their workloads are being used. AppD is a great example of how we do that. The second one is really about security. You just touched upon that a little bit. As data traverses from one perimeter to another perimeter, how do we really protect not only our assets, but not also our customers' assets and their data is very important for us. The third one, which is our bread and butter, is really about infrastructure. Like really, how do we ensure that infrastructure works across these clouds, not just piecemealing and patchworking, but really integrating software and making it software-defined everything. In this space, it has been about partnerships. It's been partnership with Apple, partnership with Google, partnership with NetApp, partnership with a lot of the folks that are on the panel here with me. And that has really powered us to deliver our products through a cloud infrastructure. And the last one I would say is empowering teams. So with our collab suite like WebEx, etc., how do we really empower various teams to collaborate? For us to do all these 4 things, cloud is super essential. And so we used cloud early on in a very hybrid approach. We also have customers that want to have a hybrid kind of a platform, which is certain workloads running on their premise, certain workloads running off their premise. And even when it is off their premise, a clear distinction between SaaS, air-gap customers, etc. So we had to adapt and integrate our products across that complex ecosystem, especially with enterprise customers.
And enterprise, I agree. And Shanti, I know hybrid's been kind of one of these big challenges because without networking capabilities, even software-defined network capabilities from Cisco, it's a real difficult challenge to get them all connected together. But I maybe leaning into Raghu for a moment. I know Microsoft's been working with hybrid cloud for many years, starting with Azure Pack and maybe a little before that, Azure Stack and now Azure Arc. Based upon how you're seeing Microsoft customers using cloud and Azure today, what types of models are you seeing with hybrid cloud, and how is this impacting their choice about where to run workloads?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you really think about it, right? I mean, Shanti hit on a couple of key points, right? Infrastructure is now a given, right? The question is, how do you leverage that infrastructure in a globally distributed model where we really go where the customers want to go, right? And in many cases, of course, they start with on-prem, right? But then they kind of migrate to some form of either public or hybrid or multi-cloud as we think about it. And we know customers have choice. We want them to have choice, right? And so, and in many cases, we're even having conversations about the edge as we think about it. So it's not just all about the cloud, but it's also the intelligent edge as we think, right? So really the way we think about it is customers on their own terms, defining the model, and it's always typically a mix of those, and then enabling their success through that kind of the different solutions that we kind of offer, right? And you put it out in terms of Azure as we kind of go do it, right? Hybrid, we certainly were one of the early pioneers in it. we've been betting pretty consistently on the hybrid model, not just the public, as we kind of go look at it. And in many cases, it's the partnerships and the different solutions that we bring, either it's first party or third party, to the customers, which really kind of truly differentiates us, right? I'll give you a couple of examples there, Matt, when we just even think about infrastructure. As a hyperscaler, as we kind of look at it, we truly differentiate by the global number of regions we bring. Obviously, much more than, we have 60 plus regions, right? Which covers 140 countries. So it's way more than any other cloud solution provider out there because customers ask for it, right? We've been dealing with enterprises for 30 years. So for us, this is not new when you kind of talk about dealing with enterprises. And the way we do it is it's very much partner led. We've got almost 70,000 partners who kind of go front and center and enable it. So that's another key differentiator for us. And then the last piece that I would kind of add on is these solutions that you're kind of talking about, technology differentiated solutions. It has to be brought in a way where whether it's both trusted, it's very secure, and it's super compliant. And so when you look at certifications and compliance, we've got like 90 plus certifications, right? So whether you're talking data, whether you're talking infrastructure, or whether you're talking any of those mixed solutions, right, in a multi-cloud model, what we do is we kind of really pivot based on the customer terms. And trust me, I think we're still in the very, very early innings of the game. So there's a long way as we kind of think about the tremendous growth ahead of us.
Yeah. Absolutely, and you know, thinking through the certifications, thinking through the training, the partnerships, you know, it leads into the foundational set of skills that are needed in order to be able to, let's say, run these environments. But you know, Chris, sort of leaning back to you, you know, runtime management of these distributed cloud workloads, you know, through a single pane of glass is a real operational challenge. So, you know, looking through your lens, you know, what is a cloud neutral strategy to monitor across these edge, these hybrid, these multi-cloud scenarios to really get the best experience so that you can take advantage of the things that Raghu was speaking to?
Yeah, it's a very complex term for sure. You know, in the days of enterprise IT, right, there has been billions of dollars, I think, made in the pursuit of the single pane of glass. I don't know if we've ever quite gotten there. And I don't think we need to. I think it's really more about being selective in terms of where does it really make sense to centralize versus decentralize IT operations. You know, VMware is in an interesting position because we kind of sit like some of the other folks on the panel here. We're not a mega cloud, but we sit between them and we look to enable cloud services in lots of different places. Right? We have a VMware footprint in every major cloud data center in the world today, or at least we're on that path. And we work with folks like the Azure team to help land their services really anywhere there's also a VMware footprint, which whether it's Azure or Google or AWS or anybody else, it's about accelerating the route to market. But if we take a step back to your question on the single pane of glass, I think there's a lot of areas where we can be effective. So when you start to think about security, policy enforcement and compliance, this is an area that's really important to folks. Data protection and recovery are areas where folks want to at least have visibility across these different cloud paradigms, plus on-prem, plus edge sites, and lots of other places, right, where we're going to be landing our applications. And then when you start to think about it in terms of what matters to the business, where we're starting to see a bit more maturity from IT organizations and decision makers, is around this notion that there's some aspects of the application stack that are not going to differentiate you as a business. You don't need to continue to spend time and money with IT specialists doing things such as database as a service. It's a commodity IT problem. Just backing up, snapshotting, replicating, updating databases is not something that every enterprise needs to pay for. So just consume that as a cloud service. But then there's other aspects where you say, you know what? I want to build some parts of this IP that really defines who I am as a business. I want to decouple that from cloud platforms. I want to decouple that from on-prem platforms. I want to have flexibility where I'm designing applications with the expectation of change. And that's leading a lot of folks down the Kubernetes path. And this gets us into areas around what I would call hybrid applications, where some parts of the stack might be on a public cloud service. There might be parts of the stack that you're building natively in Kubernetes, and you're starting to decouple portions of the stack to give you more flexibility. So, in some sense, you're having some aspects of single panes in lots of different places, but you have to be strategic about, how you go about it. We don't want to ever try to strip out all of the real good value that you see in the native cloud services, because cloud providers should be differentiating. They should be building value adds on top of their platforms. And those higher level services is where it happens. So I think there has to be a bit more pragmatism. And sometimes we need to step away from the the overly enthusiastic journey towards trying to have deep centralization, right? Which is something I think we get rooted in early computer science classes. I don't know where it comes from, but somewhere it comes from, right? And there's that balance with pragmatism at the same time.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that isolationism is probably not the right approach either. It's staying away from, bringing everything in house and turtling in, if you would, to avoid change. Vikas and Anthony, we'll go through a couple more questions on hybrid cloud before we then pivot into maybe some software development components. But Vikas, Google's made some pretty large investments into Anthos as a hybrid cloud strategy, but not necessarily hybrid cloud, thinking more along the lines of application modernization. And while we're going to talk about a service mesh and containerization topic in a moment, what are your thoughts around the concept of cloud democratization as it applies to application modernization and what Anthos might bring?
So, I think a couple of points, if you just take a step back for a minute, right? I mean, I think Mark Anderson coined the phrase software is eating the world over 10 years back, right? Organizations have come to realize the fundamental truth of this idea. And today, more and more enterprises are trying to become like software companies, right? And they are embracing technology to make that impact, which means that they're becoming big consumers of cloud technology. And as they do that, there's a heightened use of containers and microservices, and because they need to have the scale and performance. The impact there is really around three things, right? A lot of them still work through and deal with the non-productive and repetitive tasks. A lot of them still using the cloud have to deal with slow rate of innovation. They struggle with compliance, and in some cases, proprietary interfaces that they are working with. So I think as we talk to our customers, and especially in these times where it's a balance between cost and innovation to be digital, I think there's a big focus on automation, productivity, and portability. So if you look at our point of view from an Anthos perspective, right, this is where we are meeting where our customers are. With Anthos, we made, Anthos is basically supporting what Service Mesh is. It's, with Istio, it's basically the Google managed offering where, you can use, you can write an application once and use it on Google public cloud, or basically, you can have a point of view where you want to run it as a hybrid with the same platform supporting the application between an on-prem and a cloud capability, but you have a choice to use VM or virtual hypervisors or basically using bare metal. But what we're also doing beyond that is, we going extending on the point of where we want to meet where our customers are. It's more about if customers are also using other clouds. Today you can support, Anthos supports applications on Amazon, on AWS, and we are also in preview and beta on Azure as well, right? And we're extending the same capability to the edge from a platform perspective. But I think if you start looking at the holistic solution footprint as a consumption model, there's the containers, microservice, etc. But there's also the analytics and the AI elements, which are now becoming gradually a part of this application development framework. So that's where we have brought in the AI services and analytics on Anthos, so you can actually run your workloads on different cloud providers or as a hybrid, but then still be able to process your data as you want.
Yeah, and we could take AI, that we could add another hour to our conversation just on that topic alone with machine learning capabilities. Anthony, maybe to close out this topic with you, we talked a lot about clouds and applications and workloads and management, but we really haven't dug into data, and data drives a lot of the decisions for companies, particularly when it comes to cloud use. And I think of NetApp when I think of data. You've been building a portfolio of products to work with hyperscalers for many years, and given this trend around disaggregation and really data-driven decision making, how have you seen customers evaluate their data use in this evolving and spreading ecosystem of workload?
Well, I mean, I think it is as you suggest. I think I remember when I first started building applications, the application owned the data. And now as you start to build applications, you're assuming that the data probably exists, or at least your application will have to use somebody else's data. And so I think there has been this pivot to data-driven applications. I think the obvious thing that we're all aware of is that data is a very valuable asset, but it has mass. We call this sort of gravity, and data gravity, is always, I think, going to be a sort of a challenge for people in building and deploying hybrid applications. While the compute can move around quite quickly, data is data, and you can pack it as tightly as you possibly can. But moving large amounts of it, it's still proven today that FedEx can move more data than the internet, and Microsoft and Google will ship you a box, and you can plug it in, and then you can ship it back to them. So, data gravity, I still think is a very sort of critical consideration in application design and application deployment. And even within, Kubernetes and microservices, it's well documented by the CNCF that sort of storage has been sort of a very significant challenge in the container space. Obviously, dating back from the Borg project, Kubernetes was built very much to be a sort of a stateless sort of application orchestration bus. And now, of course, people really want to build stateful applications with it. And, we've at NetApp for the longest time really tried to sort of enable through our own open source projects the manifestation of sort of shared storage within a Kubernetes cluster, whether that's sort of physical storage or software defined. We've been doing a lot of work with Google on a new version of ONTAP that is software defined, that sits within Kubernetes and respects Kubernetes as the control plane for things like high availability, auto scaling. But what's great about it is it moves with the cluster. So if you're using sort of Anthos and you decide you want to sort of set up a canary or an A/B test, our software, because it's inside the cluster, will move with the service mesh and then establish the data relationships automatically. So data will play, I think, an ever increasing sort of part of every application design, and will become, I think, as many predict, the most valuable asset on earth.
Yeah, and in terms of pivoting this conversation towards how we think about data, but also how we look at containerization, automation, a service mesh concept, and not just containerized base. Maybe we'll quickly pivot this to Chris, and just a quick time check for folks. We got a couple more minutes left, and we'll get to customer questions. But Chris, maybe to you, I keep hearing that people want to go to Kubernetes, and we see a lot of our customers using containerized solutions or adapting their traditional statically built applications with everything encoded outside of a container now into a containered model. Do you think enterprise companies are fully framed up today to be able to take advantage of containerization, much less service meshes as a concept?
Yeah, it's funny. We're doing a lot of work with service mesh, and we'll be showing some new service mesh technologies at our VMworld conference in a couple of weeks. And one of the internal discussions we have is, I'd say it's easily less than 10% of enterprise customers are doing meaningful production work with Kubernetes today. And so to get to a point of maturity where they're really ready to take on service mesh is even a bit further out than that. So we are in the early days, but I think the other area that sometimes gets missed in the narrative is, earlier this year we had launched vSphere 7 with Kubernetes, which is really Kubernetes baked into our hypervisor platform. And what's interesting about that is basically from an IaaS layer, you have upstream Kubernetes now to be able to have a clean integration. And what we had done was we took this platform to our ISV partners, many of which were trying to do just native integration, say with the VMware stack. And we told them, no, don't use our APIs. Use Kubernetes to now integrate with our stack. And the reason for that is any engineering investment that they make with VMware, they can repurpose with VMware competitors, such as Red Hat as well. The bottom line there is it was just good for the ecosystem. So when even folks are thinking about, well, I don't do a lot of in-house dev and maybe Kubernetes is not right for me. Even if you're not developing on Kubernetes today, it should still be strategic to your organization because it provides a standard means by which I can integrate third-party PaaS, SaaS, and ISV services onto any platform that's also based on Kubernetes. So we see a lot of traction around Kubernetes operators, further development of an ecosystem. And this is what I think really makes the technology so powerful, is that you really do have a lot of flexibility now in terms of how you're packaging and delivering and managing your applications. and that could be independent of infrastructure. Now, you might say, well, why is VMware so into this? I mean, for us, it's like, if we're abstracting away, the integration point or the hooks into our platform itself, isn't that bad for VMware? Well, to me, it means it just puts pressure on us to continue to do what we do around infrastructure and availability of infrastructure anywhere, and win customers' business on merit. At the end of the day, we just want to be the sandbox where you have, multiple services even from public clouds that can run together collectively on a single IaaS platform, which is unique to our strategy and something that we think will continue to play out or provide value to customers going forward.
Right. And I think about the adoption of these models and maybe extracting away from the idea of the infrastructure and moving now into more of even just serverless concepts, to Raghu and Vikas, and feel free to chime in, either of you, around this idea of serverless, or, low code, no code scenarios where you're now no longer programming through even containers. You're just building your code, dropping it into small instances, dropping it into functions, for example, and saying, away you go. Is this the new model? Does it apply everywhere? Or do you see that still doesn't address everything for customer needs? And maybe Raghu, we'll start with you, and then to Vikas.
Yeah, sure. I think the evolution on that one is pretty natural there, Matt. I mean, I think more and more you can kind of simplify to really make it serverless and no code, low code. People are going to adopt it faster, right? And it's a very natural path as you kind of go think about it. I even want to go back to what Anthony said. I mean, when you think about data, right? I mean, we all talk about infrastructure. Data is going to be all over the place, and it's going to be moving from left to right. And I give a quick plug to him. The Azure NetApp files, that scenario that we have, obviously has been wonderful from a storage perspective and data retrieval and analysis perspective. So it's applications and capabilities like that when we kind of bring to the table, that you're going to naturally see that growth that you're kind of talking about, right? Now, how that evolves and in what kind of cases is really the kind of the name of the game as we kind of go think about it, right? And as I said, whether it's on the edge, and I already see questions popping up about that one, it's going to happen naturally as we're going to kind of go think about it. So let me hand it off to Vikas in terms of time here.
Well, I think I'll talk about a couple of things. One is, obviously, monoliths had their story that they were very deterministic, and the functions from monoliths moved to containers. You decompose them. Thereby, you created the concept of network, which you now needed to manage with the service mesh. And that's where Istio and other technologies were born. Open source effort was born. I think at Google, we understand a little bit about the scale, because if you look at the deployments we do is around 12 million builds and 650 million test cases daily, looking at 2.5 million exabytes of logs every month, parsing 14 quadrillion monitorings of metrics. So what we are trying to do is we basically are taking all this learning and also the effort that we've done with research, with the DevOps research and assessment group in terms of putting into the best practice as a Google camp, which is basically helping our customers in their application modernization journey. So as a part of this, we basically do three things. One is we do a database assessment of and benchmarking of where the customer is, whether they want to build a serverless application or use Kubernetes, or on the other end, they want to modernize mainframes. Second is basically, if you look at the technology options which they can use from a GCP perspective. So if you look at the whole stateless ecosystem, I think I talked about this a few minutes back, where automation is key. So you want to eliminate repeatable tasks, but you also want to focus on your important objectives. So you expect security by default, monitoring by default, enable canary testing, continuous integration and delivery. So that's where the whole ecosystem of build, run, deploy, manage, and the portability comes in. That's the second piece. And I think the third and the most important piece in this is, especially for enterprise customers, as they are really, driving towards a consumption model, is to have this access to this best practices from a DevSecOps perspective, which I think is the blueprint for success when they start building these solutions out. So to answer your question, yes, this is becoming a normal way of deploying applications, but it has to be thought through, and best practices will help you get there faster in a cost-effective way to solve your business requirements.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. And I know we have a minute left. Anthony, I don't know if you want to take a stab at the interoperability of service question. I think about, we talked about Azure NetApp Files, and there's also CBO and CVS from NetApp that also provide consistent capability. How do you view consistency of service maybe through the lens of data as far as what NetApp might provide to customers?
Oh, so I think it was always, front and center of our strategy, which was to sort of provide our customers with that sort of flexibility in terms of where the data persists, and then how to establish relationships between the places in where it exists. We made a very, I think, deliberate decision that I think has paid off. We decided that we would go to Microsoft and then Google, and we would tell them that we wanted to build a storage platform that was as good or better actually in a public cloud than it was on premise. And I think we've achieved that. Yeah. And I think our customers see that as very much our commitment to them, that if they want to operate in a hybrid cloud environment, they can. If they want to migrate holistically to a public cloud, they can. And they won't get anything less than the same or better experience that they had with us on premise. We've tried very hard to sort of integrate very deeply behind the consoles. We are a fully fledged, Microsoft service. You actually can't buy Azure NetApp Files from NetApp. It's a Microsoft product, and it's exposed through the ARM API and native in the console. So we've chosen to sort of to take on that responsibility and to continue to sort of explore incremental services that help our customers be more successful. So, in the old days of IT infrastructure, everything was a layer. You'd have a networking team and a storage team and a compute team and a, operating system team and a security team. In the cloud, we tend to see people making sort of workload decisions, and they expect sort of the services to sort of take care of themselves. And so not only have we made our storage available as a sort of first class in the cloud, but we've taken on the sort of the fully managed construct and not just sort of the self-managed. So, it's interesting when people talk about serverless, we know there's still servers there. I sort of feel that, we're sort of trying to do the same thing with storage, or sort of storageless, that you shouldn't have to know anything about your storage. You should just ask for it in code, and it should be given to you in the appropriate protocol, the appropriate capacity, the appropriate throughput, and the appropriate latency. So, that's very much our sort of MO. And we've been, I think, on the sort of the front edge of a lot of significant joint development with the public clouds in very unique ways.
Yeah, Matt, if I could just add 30 seconds to what Anthony said. I mean, you hit on a key point there, which is cloud is now not about just what can you do differently. It's about tremendously and exponentially doing better than what you have, right? On an on-prem or a comparison, right? I mean, he hit on it. Whether it's performance or scalability or even infinite elasticity that we talked about, think about this layer of storage infrastructure or data files moving back and forth, having a tremendously better performance. That's what the meta point is, right? And that's going to tremendously kind of take it to the next level. Let's not even compare it with today. Think about how we compare it with that dramatic improvement compared to what you could do on the on-prem side, right? And that's the meta point that he's bringing up.
It's about up-leveling the performance, and we can get into discussions around, for example, service capability with the golden signals and Industry 4.0 scenarios and other things. I think we could have gone another hour, to be honest, with this discussion. But I do know we need to come to a close, given the next panel discussion, which I'd encourage all the participants to continue with. But I'd like to thank Shanti, Vikas, Chris, Anthony, Raghu, for all your insights and your perspectives. Thanks to our audience for the questions. Apologies we couldn't get to all of them, but thank you for your participation. Manoj, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And thank you, Shanti, Chris, Vikas, Anthony, Raghu. Thanks for a very deep insight into the cloud. So when at the start of the conversation, I did touch upon some of the topics, which are still a problem. I guess we're already halfway solving those problems, especially the containerization. How do you look at the infrastructure? I mean, as a business user or application developer, I want to just see how do I develop my application. Forget about the infrastructure behind it. Forget about the data behind it, right? So that's where I think we are moving. And that's where, in my experience working with the Fortune 500 clients who are non-technology clients, that's what they expect from the cloud. I don't want to worry about the infrastructure. Just give me, a place where I can go and deploy applications and forget about it. So I'm glad to hear that, we are already marching towards that goal. And thank you so much for your time.